The first thing Sergeant Dara Osai noticed about the alien vessel was that it was crying. Not metaphorically, not in any way that could be explained by atmospheric interference or the screech of hull metal under deceleration stress. The ship, 3 kilometers of dark, living bone architecture hanging above the Ganymede relay station, was producing a sound that every human technician on the platform recognized at a gut level, even if none of them could name it. It was low and recursive and deeply wrong, the way a frequency feels when it hits the part of the inner ear that evolution reserved for warnings. Dara heard it through the station hull and set down his coffee. He had been assigned to Ganymede Station 7 for 11 months. His job was maintenance. Specifically, the coin-op laundry units on sub-level 4, the ones used by the rotating crew of 78, the ones that broke down every third cycle because someone kept running boots through them. He was not a soldier. He had washed out of the 14th Mobile Infantry 3 years ago after a field medic evaluation flagged his left knee and his tendency to stop moving during firefights and look at things longer than regulations allowed. The recruiter who processed his transfer paperwork had said, not unkindly, that he seemed more suited to watching than fighting. He had not disagreed. He was watching now, through the reinforced porthole of sub-level 4, as the alien ship descended into a holding pattern 200 kilometers above the station's upper array. The crying sound grew louder, or maybe it didn't grow louder. Maybe it just became more present, the way a smell saturates a room, not increasing but filling. The station intercom clicked. Commander Yevgenia Marsh, 9 levels up, voice flat and military careful. All non-essential personnel to designated shelter zones. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Dara did not move to a shelter zone. He watched the ship. It was the Vorath vessel designation *H. He'd heard the name in briefings, the way you hear names in briefings, with the texture of things that aren't supposed to become real. The Vorath had made first contact 14 months ago, above Mars, with a diplomatic delegation of 3 ships and a translator AI that had taken 6 weeks to decode enough of their language to produce anything resembling conversation. What emerged from those weeks was not reassuring. The Vorath were old, extraordinarily, geologically old. They had been crossing the arm of this galaxy before humans had fire, and they regarded humanity the way a person regards a fungus they've found interesting on a tree, with a kind of detached, scientific warmth that wasn't the same as caring. They had one standing demand. They had made it 17 times in 14 months, with increasing precision, as their translator AI improved. They wanted their daughters back. Humanity had no idea what that meant. The emergency lasted 4 hours and resolved in the way most emergencies on Ganymede Station resolved, with paperwork. The H. withdrew to a standard 300-kilometer observation distance. The station sent a priority communique to Earth Command. Earth Command responded with a 40-page bureaucratic holding pattern, and Commander Marsh called a general assembly in the main canteen to tell 78 people that nothing had happened and they should return to duties. Dara returned to sub-level 4. There was a new resident in the laundry room. She was sitting on the floor between the 3rd and 4th washing units, knees drawn up, back against the warm metal of the machine. She was wearing a station maintenance uniform, orange stripe down the left sleeve, which meant engineering, but her face was wrong for the uniform. Not her features, her expression. Most people on the station wore their faces like tools, efficient and kept. Hers was out, wide open. She had the look of someone who had just been hit by something that left no bruise. Her name, he would learn later, was Mizuki Sato. She was a structural integrity engineer, 8 months into her rotation, and she had a reputation on the station for 2 things: exceptional work and exceptional solitude. Nobody ate with her. Nobody knew quite why. She was not unfriendly. She was just sealed, the way a vessel is sealed, tight and pressured and carefully maintained and not meant to be opened without equipment. She was staring at the porthole. "The ship is still there," she said, without looking at him. "Yes." "Do you know what they want?" He sat down on the floor beside her. Not close, 2 machines worth of distance. The floor was warm from the units running. "They're daughters," he said. "That's what command says they keep asking for." She turned her head then, and he saw something move across her face, fast and then gone, like a shape underwater. "How long have they been asking?" 14 months. She was quiet for a long time. One of the machines finished its cycle and started its spin, a low churning rhythm. She said, "Have they said what happened to them?" "Just that they were lost, somewhere in this system, a long time ago." "How long?" The translation isn't precise. The Vorath measure time differently. Best estimate is somewhere between 2 and 10,000 years. She turned back to the porthole. He sat with her. He was good at sitting with people. It was one of the things the field medic evaluation had noted in his file, alongside the knee and the stopping, demonstrates exceptional capacity for unhurried presence. It had been written as a negative observation. He had always found that interesting. After a while she said, "I used to leave things in laundry machines when I was a kid. I'd put something in and forget it, and my mother would pull it out, completely changed, smaller, or the wrong color, or just ruined. And she'd hold it up with this look like she couldn't understand how I managed to break something that was designed not to break." He didn't say anything. "I feel like that right now," she said. "Like I just came out of a cycle different from how I went in." "The ship scared you?" "No." She looked at him for the first time fully. Her eyes were dark and very steady. "It didn't scare me. It sounded like, I don't know how to say it, it sounded like it recognized something." He learned her in increments. That was how you learned people. He had found, not in conversations designed for learning, but in the small transactions of proximity. In the way she loaded machines. Systematically, heaviest items first, always balancing the drum. In the coffee she took without milk or sugar or comment. In the fact that she came to sub-level for 3 nights in a row after the ship's appearance and sat in the same spot on the floor and didn't ask him to leave, which was its own kind of invitation. She had come to Ganymede. She told him on the 3rd night to get away from Earth. Not from anything specific, from everything in aggregate. She had grown up in Osaka, in a house near the river, with a mother who folded laundry into perfect geometric shapes and left them on the edge of Mizuki's bed, a silent daily communication that Mizuki had never quite managed to decode. Her mother had died 2 years ago. She hadn't gone back for the funeral. She said this the way she said most things, level-toned without asking for a reaction. He gave her none, which seemed to be right. He had come to Ganymede. He told her in exchange, because a machine could always be fixed. It either worked or it didn't, and if it didn't, the problem was always inside it and always findable. He liked that. He had grown up in Accra, in a compound where 6 families shared 2 washers and a dryer that needed to be kicked in a specific spot on its lower left panel to start. And he had learned that specific kick, and it had made him feel, at 7 years old, like he possessed a kind of knowledge that mattered. He had been looking for that feeling in larger machines ever since. "And," she said, "Ganymede Station's washing machines are not satisfying," he said. "They are badly designed and frequently abused, but the porthole view is good." She almost smiled. It was the nearest she got, those first weeks. A slight softening around the corners of her mouth that happened and then was immediately taken back, like she'd caught herself doing something she wasn't supposed to. He found it, that almost smile, one of the most interesting things he'd seen in a long time. The Vorath made their 19th request 43 days after the incident above Ganymede. This time, they did something new. They sent a data packet alongside the standard transmission, a compressed file that took Earth Command's linguistics team 12 days to partially parse. What they extracted was a story. The Vorath did not have a word for fairy tale or myth or legend. Their language had a word that translated approximately as the record of what was felt to be true before there was certainty, which the linguists short, for working purposes, to deep story. The data packet contained a deep story. It was fragmentary, the compression had degraded some of it, but enough survived. Long ago, during the age before the Vorath had stopped counting time, the Empress Kavorinsail had 3 daughters. The daughters were her voice in the void, her expansion into the dark. They traveled ahead of the fleet, seeding knowledge, mapping the unnamed. They were the Vorath word that translated as both scout and beloved. One cycle, the deep story did not say how. The linguists noted this absence like a bruise. The daughters were separated from the fleet. The fleet searched. The fleet searched for what the translation called longer than stone. They did not find them. The Empress did not die. The Vorath lived extraordinarily long lives, and grief for them was not a thing that ended or resolved. It simply became part of the body like calcium in bone. The Empress had carried her daughter's absence for thousands of years, and it had made her something other than what she had been. Not broken, transformed, dense with loss the way a dwarf star is dense with collapsed matter. She had never stopped transmitting their names into the void. And then, 14 months ago, something in this solar system had transmitted back. Not the daughters, their echo. Some resonance of them, distributed, diluted, changed, but unmistakably present in the genetic and cognitive signature of the species that had arisen here while the Vorath fleet was elsewhere. Something of the daughters was here in humanity. Not metaphor, not spiritual concept. The Vorath were precise, empirical people, and they did not deal in metaphor when they said, "Our daughters are in you." They wanted them returned. Dara read this in the station bulletin, and then sat with it for a long time on the floor of Sublevel 4, listening to a machine run its rinse cycle, the water moving through pipes in the walls. He was thinking about what Mizuki had said. It sounded like it recognized something. He went to find her. She was in engineering, running a structural stress diagnostic on the lower docking ring, and she looked up when he came in with an expression that said she'd been expecting him for reasons she couldn't articulate. He showed her the bulletin on his tablet. She read it twice. Then she set the tablet on the console and looked at the wall. A very long time passed. The diagnostic program beeped its completion. "They think we have their daughters inside us," she said. "That's what Command is saying. Genetically, or something like it. The Vorath don't use the same biological frameworks we do. The linguists are still working out what they mean by daughters in the first place, whether it's offspring or something more like a distributed consciousness, or both." She was quiet. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking about my mother's laundry," she said. He waited. "She would wash my father's shirts after he left. He left when I was 6. He just stopped coming home, and she kept washing his shirts for 2 years. They were still in the closet. She washed them every few months, folded them perfectly, put them back. I asked her once why she was washing shirts for someone who wasn't there. She said, because they still carry his smell. Because something of him is still in them. If I wash them with care, that thing stays." She picked up the tablet and read the bulletin again. "I think the Empress understands that," she said. "Something of her daughters is in us, in human cells or human thought patterns or whatever the Vorath equivalent of a soul is. She doesn't want it gone. She wants it found and acknowledged and brought home, even if home means back into contact, not back into bodies, even if it can't be fully what it was." She set the tablet down. "She's not asking us to give her something we have. She's asking us to introduce her to what's left." Dara looked at her. "How do you get all of that from a fragmentary translation of an alien folk tale?" She met his eyes. That almost smile, and this time it didn't immediately withdraw. "Because I also washed my father's shirts after my mother died. She'd kept them all that time. I found them in the closet. I didn't know what else to do with them. He started leaving things for her. He didn't announce this. He didn't frame it. He simply began doing it. A cup of coffee left on the workbench and engineering at the hour he knew she'd be running her morning diagnostic. A sandwich from the canteen on the days the menu had the sesame noodles she'd mentioned once, in passing, that she used to eat by the river in Osaka. A note, not a message, on the station system. A handwritten note on paper he'd found in a supply closet that said only, "Porthole view is better after 2300 if you want company." She never mentioned the coffee. She ate the sandwiches. She came to sub-level 4 at 2300 twice that week and sat in her spot on the floor, and they watched the distant lights of the *H consort hold their position in the dark. And she told him about the river in Osaka, the smell of it in summer, the way the light came off the water at a particular angle in the late afternoon that made everything look like it was already a memory. He told her about the compound in Accra, the way 6 families negotiated a shared dryer, the unwritten rules that everyone knew and nobody had to say. The small diplomacies of proximity. "That's what it is," she said one night. "What the Voreth are doing. It's not colonialism. It's not resource extraction. It's what you do when you've lost someone and you find something that carries their mark. Command doesn't see it that way. Command is afraid. They're afraid because the ship is 3 kilometers of something they don't understand, and it's been sitting over this station for 6 weeks. Yes," she pulled her knees up, "fear makes sense, but I don't think it's what's required here." "What's required?" She thought about it. The machine hummed. The porthole held the distant star that was not a star. "Someone who knows how to handle things that have been lost," she said. He put in the transfer request the next morning. It was technically a volunteer dispatch. Earth Command had been soliciting personnel from all stations for a new initiative called the Voreth Interface Program, which was either the most important diplomatic mission in human history or an elaborate way of getting people killed, depending on who you asked. Dara had been asked, informally, by Commander Marsh if he had any relevant expertise. He had said that he knew how to fix things that were broken and sit with things that weren't ready to be fixed yet. Marsh had given him a look that lasted about 4 seconds longer than it needed to. "That might be exactly right," she had said. The interface program was being run out of a converted science vessel, the *Meridian*, which would make the approach to the *H consort* with a crew of 11. 4 xenolinguists, 2 xenobiologists, a psychologist, a communications specialist, a pilot, a security officer, and Dara, listed in the manifest under the category General Crew Maintenance. He suspected someone had thought carefully about including a person whose official function was to keep things running and clean. Mizuki found him packing. She stood in the doorway of his quarters on sub-level 4, small quarters, barely a compartment, smelling of detergent and machine oil, and looked at his duffel bag on the bunk and said nothing for a moment. "You put in for the interface program," she said. "Yes." "Why?" He folded a shirt. "Because I think I understand what they're asking for, not the biology of it, not the linguistics, the emotional logic. Someone lost their daughters. Something of those daughters is here. She's been carrying that loss for thousands of years, long enough for us to evolve from whatever we were when they seeded us." He put the shirt in the bag. "She needs someone to sit with her, to say, 'I see you. I see what you lost. Let me show you what's left of them.'" Mizuki was quiet for a long time. "That's not in your job description," she said. "My job description is keeping machines running. It's related." She leaned against the doorframe. She was wearing the orange striped uniform, but the collar was open, and she looked, for the first time he'd seen, like she might be cold, like she had surfaces that could be reached. "I filed an addendum request this morning," she said. "Structural integrity assessment for the interface vessel. The *Meridian was retrofitted in a hurry. The lower coupling assembly has tolerance issues. They accepted it. He stopped folding, looked at her. "I'm not going for the Empress," she said. Her voice was level. "I'm going because the coupling assembly is genuinely problematic, and because I know how to handle things that have been washed too many times and come out changed." He thought about her mother folding shirts, about the river in Osaka, about the way she had read that alien folk tale and found her own family inside it. "The view from the Meridian porthole is probably better than this one," he said. That almost smile, and this time it stayed. The Meridian approached the H consort on a Tuesday, which was meaningless to the Vorath and very meaningful to Dr. Chen, the mission psychologist, who believed in the grounding power of terrestrial time conventions under stress. The approach took 6 hours. The distance between them and the alien vessel decreased in a way that the human mind struggled to process. 3 kilometers of living architecture, black and asymmetric, that looked less like a ship the closer you got and more like something that had always been there, and had simply chosen, recently, to be visible. The crying sound was not in the hull this time. It was in the air inside the Meridian not imagined. The xenobiologists confirmed it, a subsonic transmission, modulated at frequencies consistent with emotional signaling in several mammalian species on Earth. They said this like it was interesting. Dara heard it like someone had reached through the hull and pressed a thumb against his sternum. He was standing with Mizuki at the forward observation window when the docking arm extended from the H consort. "That's not a standard approach," the pilot said. "It's not a standard situation," Commander Yao, the mission lead, said. The arm extended not to the Meridian's primary dock, but to the maintenance access port on the lower hull, sublevel access. Dara looked at Mizuki. She looked at him. "They've been watching us," she said quietly. "They know where we go." They went through the maintenance port. Not the mission commanders, not the xenolinguists with their translation arrays, not the xenobiologists with their sampling equipment. Dara and Mizuki, carrying nothing except a tablet with the partial deep story translation and a thermos of coffee because Dara had made it before they left, and it seemed wrong to leave it behind. The connecting tunnel was warm and dark and smelled of something organic and sweet, like turned earth after rain. The walls were not walls exactly. They had a quality of living surface, dense and slow-moving at a scale just below perception, the way skin moves over muscle. Dara walked without hurrying. Mizuki walked beside him, close enough that their arms touched. He did not move away from that contact, and neither did she. The tunnel opened into a chamber. It was vast and quiet. The scale of it was wrong in a way that took several seconds to process. The ceiling was so far above them that it was more like sky than ceiling, and the floor was dark and smooth and appeared, as they walked on it, to register their presence in some way, a subtle lighting that followed their steps. The chamber was empty except for a structure at its center. Something that might have been a throne, or might have been a root system, or might have been both. A growth of dense, dark material that rose from the floor in an irregular column, and then spread at height into a canopy of something that moved like slow breath. In the structure's curve, or embrace, there wasn't a word for the geometry of it, sat the Empress. She was large. Not grotesquely, not in a way that precluded presence or stillness. Larger than a human, yes, but the largeness was not what you noticed. What you noticed was the gravity of her, the density. The field medic had been wrong. Dara did not have a tendency to stop and look at things. He had a tendency to stop and absorb them, to hold them until he understood what they were asking of him. He stood and absorbed the Empress. She had 4 limbs in a configuration that was not quite anything terrestrial, and a face that was less a face than an array of perception. Structures along the front of the body that suggested sight and sound and something else, something that might have processed meaning directly. Her surface was dark and textured, and in the chamber's light it caught color in a way that reminded him of a deep-water fish, iridescent and strange. She was looking at them. The translator AI was active on his tablet. He could feel it processing. She made a sound. The AI took 11 seconds, which was long for it. "You are the ones who tend the machines that clean." He said, "Yes." "You know what is left when washing is done, what the water pulls out and what it leaves." "Yes." The sound she made next was longer, and the AI took longer. "My daughters seeded many worlds. We are not, the word you would use is not gods. We carry patterns, and we leave patterns in the making space of new life. This is our purpose in the traveling. We do not own what grows, we do not claim. But we remember what we planted." A pause. The sound shifted register. When they were lost, the planting continued in them. What they would have become, they became inside the generations of your kind. We can feel it. When we came into range of your transmissions, your first signals, the ones that crossed light years, something in us resonated. We knew we were hearing our daughters' voices, changed past recognition, but ours. Another pause. We do not want to take this back. We cannot take it back. We would not if we could. Your kind is its own making now. She moved just slightly, a settling that was enormous and slow. We want only to know them, to see what they became. To grieve them properly, which is not the same as ending grief, but is the act of acknowledging it in the presence of what remains. Dara looked at Mizuki. She was not crying. She was very still, and the stillness was the kind that comes from having arrived, after a long walking, somewhere you recognized from a description. She stepped forward, he let her. She stood closer to the Empress than he would have gone, and she held up nothing, no equipment, no offering, no sample. She just stood there, and after a moment she put her hand on the chamber floor and kept it there, flat against the dark surface that registered presence. She said, in a voice that was very quiet, "My mother kept my father's shirts after he left. She washed them for years because something of him was in them. She never stopped, even after he was gone. She was cleaning them for the memory of him, not to remove what was there but to care for it, to say this mattered, this is still mattering." The AI translated. The Empress was still. "That," the Empress said. The AI rendered only that word and then added a notation. No adequate translation follows. The subsequent vocalization is classified as emotional register, grief present, recognition present, gratitude present, without corresponding human vocabulary. Mizuki lowered her head. Dara sat down on the floor. He was not doing anything dramatic. He was doing what he did, which was to be present in a place where presence was required, unhurried and available, a steady point in a space where very old grief was meeting very new recognition. It was not the same as fixing something. It was closer to the moment before the fix, when you'd opened the machine and found the problem and hadn't touched it yet, when you were simply understanding what was broken and what the breaking had cost. He sat, the Empress breathed. Mizuki stood between them like a kind of bridge. They were in the chamber for 4 hours. In those 4 hours, no formal diplomacy occurred. Nothing was signed. No protocols were established. The xenolinguists aboard the *Meridian*, monitoring the tablet's transmission, went quietly insane trying to categorize what they were observing. Commander Yao sent 3 messages asking for a status report. Dara replied to each with, "Proceeding." He suspected that word would generate paperwork for months. What happened in those 4 hours was simpler and stranger than diplomacy. The Empress spoke. The AI translated in fragments imprecisely, and the fragments fell into the chamber like objects being set down after long carrying. The name of the first daughter, which sounded like a chord played on an instrument of bone. The name of the second, which was a color in the AI's approximation, a blue-green that it noted was outside human visual range. The name of the third, which was a physical sensation, something like the pressure of a hand on the back of the neck, the comfortable weight of it. The daughters had traveled into the darkness ahead of the fleet and found, on this small, bright world, conditions for seeding. They had seeded it and named it in the internal language of Voreth explorers, a name that had no translation, but that the AI rendered, after a long pause, as asterisk the place where the small, warm things are learning to make fire. They had not returned from the seeding. The deep story said not returned and gave no cause, and the Empress said not returned in a way that made it clear, even across the translation gap, that she had spent thousands of years not knowing why. Not knowing was a specific kind of weight. Dara knew this. The field medic had said he was not suited for deployment, and he had never fully understood what that meant about him, only that something in him had been assessed and found lacking, and not knowing the exact shape of that lack had been its own carrying. He said this, not to anyone in particular, to the room, the way you sometimes say things to rooms when the room is the right size for the saying. The Empress responded. The AI took a very long time. Then, understanding without conclusion. This is a human capacity we did not anticipate. In our daughters, the original gift to your line was precision, pattern recognition, the ability to map and record. But you have developed in the generations between this other thing, the ability to remain present with what cannot be resolved. We had a long time to practice, Mizuki said. We're a young species. Everything is still unresolved. Yes, something in the Empress's aspect shifted. This is what I feel in you, not my daughters as they were. My daughters as they might have become, if they had lived long enough to learn what you have learned. The patience of unfinished things. The room breathed. Their names, Mizuki said. Would you say them again, not for translation, just say them. The Empress said them. The first one opened something in Dara's chest, though he couldn't have said what. The second one moved through the room like light through water. The third one was the weight on the back of the neck, and he felt it, actually felt it, and closed his eyes for a moment. Mizuki made a sound, small and involuntary. He opened his eyes. She was standing with her hand pressed flat against the chamber floor again, and her eyes were wet, and she said, without turning to him, I felt that. I know. How is that possible? I don't know. I think that might be the point. They returned to the asterisk meridian with nothing to show for 4 hours except the AI's fractured transcripts and a feeling in both of them that resisted description and would resist it for the rest of their lives. Commander Yao spent 40 minutes asking Dara to characterize the outcome in terms that Earth Command could use in a briefing. Dara said, she knows they're here. She knows we know. I think she's ready to grieve properly. That's going to take time and she'll want to come back. Come back, Yao said. Yes. The Empress. Yes, she'll want to have more of these. Not negotiations, not interface protocols, these conversations. With people who can sit in a room and hold something unresolved without trying to resolve it. Yao looked at him. You're describing a relationship. Yes. With an alien Empress. With a mother, he said, who lost her children a very long time ago and just found out that they grew into something she didn't expect and needs time to learn what that means. Yao was quiet. Then, I'm going to need you to write that in terms I can put in a briefing. I'll do my best. He found Mizuki at the asterisk meridian's asterisk forward observation window afterward. She was standing where she'd stood during the approach, looking at the asterisk H-consorth asterisk, and the ship was doing the thing it had done above Ganymede, the crying sound, the recursive low frequency. But it was different now. Dara stood beside her and listened. It's changed, he said. Yes. She had her arms crossed, holding herself together in a way that was habitual and unconscious. It's not grief anymore, or not only grief, there's something else in it now. He listened. She was right. The frequency was the same, but the quality was different, not the cry of a sealed thing under pressure, but the sound of a thing that had been opened and found it could sustain the opening. He thought about the compound in Accra, and the dryer that needed a kick in a specific place on its lower left panel. He thought about the 6 families and their unwritten rules, and the way a machine that is properly known will run for years past its rated life, because someone understood what it needed and gave it that without ceremony. He thought about Mizuki's mother washing shirts for a man who was gone, and the way Mizuki had pressed her hand flat against an alien floor, and felt, in her cells, the name of a creature that had died before humanity could walk upright. "When we get back to Ganymede," he said, "the Unit 3 washing machine still needs a new agitator bearing." She looked at him, the sideways look, the one he had come to know. "I know," she said. "I've been listening to it knock for 3 months. I didn't want to fix it too fast. I was learning its pattern. You were procrastinating. I was being present with it." She turned back to the window. A long moment passed. The alien ship sang its changed, opening sound into the dark. "The shirts are in my quarters," she said. "On Ganymede, my father's shirts, my mother's shirts, all of them in a bag. I've been carrying them for 2 years. I don't know what to do with them." He didn't say anything. "I thought I'd know when I got out here. I thought distance would clarify it. What you owe the dead, what you're allowed to let go." "Has it?" "No." She unfolded her arms, let them fall to her sides, which he had never seen her do. "But I think I understand now that not knowing is allowed. That you can carry a thing for a very long time, and that carrying isn't weakness or failure. It's just the thing you do until something else becomes possible." "And what's the something else?" She thought about it. In the window, the *H Consorth held its position, vast and dark, alive with its changed song. "Recognition," she said. "That's what the Empress wanted, not resolution, not return. Just for someone to say, I see that you lost something and I see what it became, and both things are real and both things matter." She looked at him. "That's what you did in there." "I sat on the floor." "You were present. You made it safe to be in the room with something enormous." She turned fully to face him, and there was nothing sealed about her face now. It was simply a face, open and tired and real. "You do that. You've been doing it this whole time." He thought about the porthole view, the coffee left on workbenches, the notes on paper from supply closets. "It's just what I do," he said. "I know," she looked at him. "I've been watching." The Meridian returned to Ganymede Station on a Thursday, which pleased Dr. Chen. In the weeks that followed, Earth Command issued 17 policy directives about the Voreth interface program, all of them missing the point in ways that were impressively precise. The xenolinguists published 3 papers. The xenobiologists filed a request for funding to study the genetic markers that the Voreth claimed connected humanity to their daughters, and the funding committee rejected it twice before a 4th-year biology postdoc at the University of Lagos found, in a dataset that had been sitting unused since 2031, something that looked very much like a non-terrestrial pattern embedded in a specific class of human neural development gene. The paper she published caused exactly the kind of chaos you'd expect. Dara read about it on his tablet in Sublevel 4, drinking coffee, listening to the Unit 3 washing machine knock, in a slightly different rhythm now that he'd replaced the agitator bearing. Mizuki was sitting in her spot on the floor between Units 3 and 4, reading the same paper on her own tablet. "My ancestors," she said. "Mine too, presumably. The Empress's daughters were in all of us, every human alive." She set the tablet on her knees. "There is something genuinely strange about that." "Yes. I don't know how to file it, categorically." "I don't think it needs to be filed," he said. "I think it's allowed to just be what it is, something true that doesn't fit anywhere yet." She looked at him. "The shirts," she said. "Yes. I washed them." She looked down at her hands. "I used the machine, Unit 2, which has the gentle cycle. I folded them after they're back in the bag, but now they're clean." She was quiet. I don't know if I'm going to send them somewhere or keep them, or I don't know, but they're clean. That's enough for now, he said. She nodded slowly. Outside the porthole, the sky above Ganymede was the particular dark that is not the absence of things but the presence of more things than light can show. Somewhere in that dark, at a distance that the station's sensors had clocked at 800 kilometers and holding, the asterisk H Consorth turned in a slow orbit, making its sound not crying now, not wholly, but something layered and complex, the kind of sound that takes a very long time to make and contains, in the making, everything that was lost and everything that remains and the space between them where life, in its stubbornness and its tenderness, insists on continuing. He sat on the floor, she sat on the floor, the machines ran, the water moved through the pipes. They didn't talk for a long time, and that was right, because some things do not need to be said to be understood, and some machines, once you know their patterns, can be trusted to run clean and steady, carrying whatever has been placed in them through whatever heat or pressure or turning is required, returning something different from what went in, worn at the edges maybe, inexact, but present and warm and still recognizably, stubbornly, entirely itself. The neural development paper was titled, in the dry language of biology journals, Anomalous Non-Terrestrial Sequence Signatures in FOXP2 Adjacent Regulatory Regions, a Preliminary Analysis. The postdoc who wrote it was named Dr. Amara Diallo, 26 years old, working out of a shared lab in Lagos that she described, in every grant application she'd ever written, as adequately equipped. She had found the pattern by accident, the way most important things are found, by looking for something else and noticing an anomaly that didn't belong to what she was looking at. The way you notice a stone in a shoe not because you were thinking about stones, but because walking suddenly costs more than it should. The pattern was not in the genes that built humans. It was in the regulatory sequences, the non-coding sections that controlled when and how the genes expressed themselves. It was, in the vocabulary of epigenetics, a kind of annotation in the margins, not the text of a human being, but a set of instructions written in a different hand, a hand that predated the writing of everything around it. It was, once the Vorath translator AI was given access to the sequence data, recognizable as script, not human script, Vorath notation, a biological encoding system the daughters had used to mark what they seeded, so that if they or their kin ever returned, they could know the work was theirs. A signature in the oldest sense, not a name, but a way of touching that was unmistakably individual. 3 signatures. 1 in regulatory sequences associated with language processing. 1 in sequences associated with pattern recognition and spatial mapping. 1 in sequences associated with what researchers had always called, imprecisely, social cognition, the ability to model other minds, to feel what another being felt, to stand in a room with someone else's grief and not flinch away. 3 daughters, 3 gifts, 3 marks left in the making of humanity like watermarks left in paper, only visible when you held the thing up to a particular light. Dara read about this on a Thursday afternoon, and then set his tablet down and looked at his hands for a long time. He had inherited something from a creature who had never met him. Something in the regulatory architecture of his neurons traced back to a being who had come to this small, warm planet before it had mammals, who had pressed something of herself into the making space of life here, who had died, or been separated, or been transformed, or whatever the Vorath word was for what happened to the daughters, before anything she recognized could grow from what she'd planted. He thought about the specificity of what she'd left, not a random mark, not an accident of proximity. The 3 daughters had, between them, given humanity its language and its mathematics and its empathy. They had, in the annotations they'd written into human regulatory DNA, essentially said, "These are the things that matter. These are the things worth making." He thought about what it meant that one of the 3 things the daughters had considered worth encoding was the ability to feel what another being felt. He thought about sitting on the floor of a Voreth chamber, while an alien Empress said her daughters' names, and felt that third daughter's gift activate in his chest like a frequency he'd been built to receive. He picked up his tablet and sent a message to Mizuki. Did you read the Lagos paper? 3 minutes later, yes. Which daughter do you think we are? A longer pause. Then, all three. They didn't sort by person. They put it in everyone. Every human who ever lived got all three gifts. He sat with that. My mother could do all three asterisk Mizuki sent. She mapped the space of every room she entered. She learned the language of silence and gesture and knew exactly what you meant without saying. And she felt it. She felt everything. She just couldn't always say it. That sounds like a daughter. A pause, then, that sounds like a mother. He thought about that for a long time. The Voreth interface program's second session was scheduled for 6 weeks after the first. In the interim, Earth Command had, with the particular efficiency of large bureaucracies facing things they could not control, generated significant documentation. There were protocols for approach, protocols for communication, a recommended vocabulary list for human representatives, a psychological screening process that involved 17 questions, including one that asked participants to rate their comfort with open-ended outcomes on a scale of 1 to 5. Dara rated himself a 4 because he suspected answering 5 would generate follow-up questions. The screening committee accepted him. It also accepted Mizuki, who had answered the same question with the word depends. And then, when asked to clarify, had written a paragraph about the difference between outcomes that are unresolved because they are incomplete and outcomes that are unresolved because they are correct as they are. The committee flagged this response as philosophically atypical, and then accepted her anyway because her structural assessment of the asterisk meridian's asterisk lower coupling had been exactly right, and nobody wanted to argue with someone who'd saved the mission from a catastrophic docking failure before it happened. They briefed each other in Sublevel 4, 2 nights before departure, over terrible coffee and the ambient percussion of the Unit 3 machine, which had developed a new, slightly different knock that Dara was monitoring, but had decided was not yet critical. "What do you think she'll ask this time?" Mizuki said. "I don't know. Last time she wanted to know that we knew, that we felt it." "We did." "Yes," he turned his cup in his hands. "This time I think she'll want to tell us something, about them, about who they were before they were lost. Like a parent showing you pictures." He hadn't thought of it that way, but it was right. Yes, like a parent showing you pictures of someone you're descended from, someone you never met but that you can see in yourself, once you know where to look. Mizuki nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about what I want to ask her." "What?" "Whether it hurts less, knowing. Whether the recognition is, I don't know. Whether being found is as good as finding from her side." He thought about that. "Do you know the answer?" "I think it has to be, otherwise what are we doing here?" She looked at the porthole. "My mother never found out where my father went. He just stopped. There was no, she never got to say, I see what happened, I understand it, this is what it means. She just had the absence and the shirts and the fact of having loved him and the fact that loving him had made me and that I existed and was real and that was something." She was quiet for a moment. She died not knowing, but she kept washing the shirts. She kept tending the evidence of him, like that could close the loop somehow. Like care itself was a kind of answer, even when the question never resolved. Dara looked at her. She was still looking at the porthole, at the distant lights of the station's upper array, at the dark beyond them. "The Empress has been tending for 10,000 years, he said. "Yes. That's a long time to care for something you can't reach." "I think," Mizuki said, "that's what I want to tell her, that it counts, that the tending counted even across that distance, even when she couldn't know what was growing, that we are evidence, that we are the shirts." She finally turned to look at him. "Does that make sense?" "Yes," he said, It makes complete sense. She held his gaze for a moment. Her face was open. She had the look of someone who had walked a very long way and found that the destination was not a place but a decision, to stop moving and be where you were and trust that where you were was, in fact, where you were supposed to be. She said, "You should know that I'm not good at this." "At what?" She made a gesture that included him and the room and apparently their entire history of sitting on floors together. "This, people, proximity. I tend to close, go interior. It's a fault." "I know," he said. "You've been getting better at it." "Have I?" "You told me about your mother, your father, the shirts, the river in Osaka." He looked at her. "You told me about putting things in the washing machine as a child and having them come out changed. You said it unprompted in the first week, and I don't think you realized you were doing it." She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't." "That's you being good at it, the being open. You do it naturally and then you close it back up and think it was a failure." "It wasn't." She looked at him for a long time. "The coffee," she said, "on the workbench, that was you." "Yes." "And the sandwiches." "Yes." "The note on paper." "Yes." She reached over and picked up his coffee cup and drank from it, not her cup, his, a gesture so casual and so intimate that he felt it somewhere behind his ribs. She set it back down. She said, "When we get back from the second session, I want to walk by the river. There isn't one on Ganymede. I mean when we go back to Earth, eventually. I want to walk somewhere near water." "There's a river in Accra," he said. She looked at him. "I know, you've told me about the compound." "I haven't told you about the river." "No," she said. "But there's a river in Accra, and you grew up there, and it would be strange to visit and not see it." He smiled. He had a good smile, unhurried, not performed, the kind that started in the eyes. "We could wash the shirts there," he said. "The river, properly by hand, the way people used to." She looked at him. "Or not," he said. "That might be strange." "No," she said. "It's right." Something settled in her. He could see it settle, could watch the long habitual tension in her shoulders find a new lower resting place. "It's exactly right. That's what you do. You find the right thing and say it like it's nothing, like it was obvious all along." She shook her head very slightly. "It's infuriating." "I can try to be less obvious." "Don't," she said. The machine knocked. The porthole held its dark and its lights. Somewhere 800 kilometers above them, the H consort asterisk sang its complex song, and in that song, Dara had been listening to it on the station's audio monitors in the evenings, because it seemed like the kind of thing you should pay attention to. There were 3 notes that recurred. Not the same 3 notes every time, but 3 always, and in a combination that the station's AI had flagged as statistically improbable. A pattern too consistent to be random, emerging from the grief-end recognition frequency like something that had always been encoded there, waiting for the right conditions to become audible. The linguists who heard the recording said they didn't know what it meant. Dara thought he knew. He thought it was the sound of a mother saying, in the only language she had left, "I see you. I see what you became. Both things are true and both things are mine, and I am glad." He thought about saying this to Mizuki and decided not to. Some things were better carried quietly until the time for them arrived. He had learned this from machines, from the compound dryer, from the Unit 3 washing machine with its changed knock that was not yet critical, from the gentle cycle on Unit 2 that had cleaned the shirts of people who were gone. He thought about the Empress, 10,000 years of orbit, the daughters' names transmitted into the void in the frequency of things felt to be true before there was certainty. He thought about humanity, all of it, every single person who had ever lived, carrying in the margins of their cells the handwriting of 3 explorers who had wanted, above everything, to ensure that what grew here could feel, could speak, could find its way through the dark by pattern, could sit in a room with something enormous and unresolved and be present with it, Unhurried, available, a steady point. Outside, the station turned in its slow orbit. Inside, the machines ran their cycles, carrying what was placed in them through whatever heat and tumbling the cleaning required, returning each thing changed and clean and warm, still itself, still mattering, still here. He drank his coffee, she drank hers. The dark held everything. The second session with the Empress was different from the first in ways that Dara would spend years trying to describe accurately and never quite manage. The first session had been about recognition, the raw, initial shock of two kinds of grief meeting across a language gap, humans finding in an alien mother's sorrow the shape of something they'd always carried without a name for it. It had been loud, in the interior sense of the word, full of new weight. The second session was quieter. It had the quality of a second visit to a place you'd gone to once under duress and returned to by choice. You knew the proportions now, you knew the smell, you moved through it differently. The Empress had arranged the chamber, or the chamber had arranged itself. It was never clear with Voreth living architecture which was happening. The floor was warmer. The ceiling's dark sky quality was present but less overwhelming. Near the base of the Empress's structure, something had grown that had not been there before, a cluster of forms that were approximately the shape of things you might set on a surface for a visitor. Not furniture, not offerings exactly. More like an acknowledgement of physical scale, of the fact that humans were small, and that small things deserved a place to be. Dara sat in that place. Mizuki stood for a while and then sat beside him. Dr. Chen had come this time with permission, and sat slightly behind them. She had her own reasons, she'd said, and they were not clinical. She had lost a daughter too, her own daughter, at 4 years old to a fever that arrived fast and left faster and left Chen herself with 30 years of its absence woven into everything she did, every patient she sat with, every room she entered and assessed for what it needed and couldn't ask for. She had read the deep story translation and recognized it as something she already knew. She didn't speak in the session. She sat and listened, and at one point she pressed her hand flat against the floor the way Mizuki had done in the first session, and the floor lit at the contact point, and the Empress made a sound the translator AI rendered as acknowledgement of loss held, presence carried, grief that does not require translation. The Empress spent the first hour telling them about the daughters as individuals, not as mythological figures, not in the register of the deep story, as people, as the Voreth word that meant both beloved and scout, which the linguists were increasingly convinced was not a compound but a genuinely unified concept. The idea that what you love is what you send forward, and what you send forward is what you love. The daughters had been the Empress's bravest and most thorough and most curious. The first had been the one who wanted to understand every language she encountered, who would not move the fleet on until she could speak to whatever was present, even if speaking took years, and what was present was simple microbial life that could be spoken to only in chemistry. The second had been the mapper, the counter, the one who could look at a system of bodies in space and calculate their motions so precisely that the fleet never once suffered a navigational error she was responsible for. The third had been the one who sat with things, who lingered, who would return to a seated world long after the others had moved on, to observe, to watch the slow unfolding of what had been planted, to note the ways life surprised the intentions of those who had shaped it. The translator AI rendered this last daughter's characteristic behavior as witnessing. The linguists flagged it and noted it was the same root word as one of the Voreth terms for love. To witness and to love were, in the Voreth language, the same act. Dara heard this and sat with it. Mizuki heard it and turned her head to look at him, and he was looking at her at the same moment, and they both looked away at the same moment, and the Empress made a sound that the AI could not parse but that Dr. Chen, sitting behind them, recognized as laughter, specifically the laughter of someone watching something they've been waiting a very long time to see finally happen. The session's second hour moved into territory that the linguists had not anticipated, and that Earth Command's briefing protocols had not prepared anyone for. The Empress asked, not for information, not for scientific data, but for something that the translator AI rendered as the stories you tell each other in the dark. She wanted to know what humans said to each other when there was no function in the saying. When they gathered for the purpose of gathering, not for the purpose of doing. When they made sounds at each other that served no survival function, but that everyone agreed were necessary. Mizuki told her about music. Dara told her about the evening gatherings in the Accra compound, 6 families on the shared courtyard after dinner. The kids in one collective mass of running and chasing. The adults talking in overlapping conversations. Occasionally singing. Occasionally arguing, occasionally just sitting while someone else talked. The whole thing held together by nothing more than the decision to be in the same place at the same time, and let that be enough. Dr. Chen told the story of her daughter's laugh. She said it in a level voice and didn't elaborate and didn't have to. The AI translated, and the Empress was still for a very long time. Then she said something long and complex that took the AI 4 minutes. The daughters would have loved you, not your kind in the aggregate you, the ones in this room. The first daughter would have wanted to learn every word you have and the mechanism of the learning. The second daughter would have wanted to map the systems you have built, not the cities and the machinery but the invisible ones, the networks of obligation and affection and habit that hold your people in their configurations. The third daughter, my third daughter, who witnessed, who lingered, who watched the slow unfolding until she could feel the shape of what had been planted. The AI paused and then added a notation. Translator flags the following as operating outside standard parameters, rendering attempt only. She is here. She is most here. Of all the gifts the 3 of them left, the one most fully present in this room in these 3 people is hers, the capacity to remain. To hold what is unresolved without demanding its resolution, to witness. The chamber breathed. The AI's translation hung in the air like something physical. Dr. Chen said, quietly, "Tell her that my daughter's name was Ifoma." The AI translated. The Empress received it with a stillness that was not the stillness of nothing happening, but the stillness of something arriving that had been traveling a very long time. She said Ifoma's name back. She said it in the third daughter's register, the witnessing voice, the one that was the same word as love. Dr. Chen made a sound and covered her mouth. The chamber held it. The Empress held it. Dara looked at the floor and Mizuki looked at the floor, and they both understood without discussing it that this moment was not theirs to witness but to sit near, to be present around the edges of, to ensure by their presence that it was safe and held and not alone. This was the third daughter's gift, the Empress had said, the capacity to remain. Dara thought, "We have been practicing." The asterisk meridian returned to Ganymede Station on a Sunday. Dr. Chen went straight to her quarters and did not come out for 2 days, and when she came out, she told Commander Yao that the program needed to continue, and that she would stay on station indefinitely to support it, and that she would like to put in a standing request to join every subsequent session. Yao, who had been reading Earth Command's policy directives and the Lagos paper and the linguist's transcripts, and had been coming, slowly, and with the resistance that comes from having spent a career in command structures, to an understanding that he was adjacent to the most important thing that had ever happened to humanity, said, "Granted." Dara fixed the Unit 3 washing machine's new knock, which turned out to be a worn bearing on the secondary drum spindle, a 5-minute repair once he had the right part. He fixed it on a Tuesday afternoon, alone in Sublevel 4, listening to the machine run through its first clean cycle after the repair, smooth, even, almost silent. He had learned that machine's patterns over 11 months on Ganymede. He knew the sound it made when it was running right, and he knew every way it deviated from that sound, and he knew which deviations mattered and which could be monitored, and which were the machine telling you something about itself that wasn't a crisis, just a truth. He had developed a relationship with it that was not the same as the relationship he had with Mizuki or with Dr. Chen or with Commander Marsh or even, in whatever way that word applied across 10,000 years and 3 kilometers of living bone architecture with the Empress. But it was a relationship. It was based on attention, on unhurried presence, on the willingness to sit with something until you understood what it was asking and whether you could give it. He thought that this might be the whole of it, actually. Not all of it, not the full weight of what it meant to be human, or to be the carrier of 3 daughters' gifts, or to be alive at the moment the oldest grief in the solar system found its answer. But the practice of it, the day-to-day enactment of what the daughters had thought worth encoding. Language to know the other. Pattern to find your way through the dark. Witness, which was the same word as love. Mizuki came in at some point during the rinse cycle. He heard her before he saw her particular walk, learned now as thoroughly as the machine's sounds, and she set a cup of coffee on the edge of the folding table without comment, which was how she gave things. He looked up. She was carrying a bag, the one she'd mentioned, the one with the shirts. She set it down beside the machine. Unit 2, she said, gentle cycle. Yes, he said. She opened the bag and began to take the shirts out carefully, one by one. They were folded in the way her mother had folded them, precise geometric shapes, the care visible in the geometry. She loaded the machine with the same systematic attention she brought to everything, heaviest items first, balanced in the drum. She put the cycle on. The machine began to fill. They sat down on the floor, their backs against the warm machine, the bag between them now empty and soft. They didn't talk. The water ran in the walls. The H-Consorth turned 800 kilometers above them in its slow orbit, singing its 3-note pattern into the dark. The daughters' names, encoded in the frequency of recognition, transmitted into a void that was no longer empty because humanity was in it, looking up, feeling the resonance, finally knowing what it was. The machine ran its gentle cycle. The shirts moved through water and warmth. Outside the porthole the stars were as they always were, too many to count, carrying too much to name, ancient and patient and present, waiting for whatever small warm things below them had learned enough to see. Dara drank his coffee, Mizuki drank hers, the cycle ran. Everything was being cleaned, and nothing was being lost, and the daughter's third gift moved through the room like something finally, after a very long time, come home.